formally.
Well, you only live in 5%
And
of
Jeff's
the
back with
house.
us.
Yep,
Jeffrey, are you here?
there is.
Oh my goodness, I can hear you.
We can even see you now.
Yes.
Okay, so back to,
Madam Chairman, we will get exhibits together for you for both my examples, being my personal farm and the Schaefer farm, so that it could be better understood. I know your counsel is saying that,
and you're gonna do reword what you would like to have passed rather than
yes, and I'll work with Stephanie to do that.
what is here. Okay, and next month,
Thank you.
does that work?
All right, thanks for your
Okay.
time.
Sounds like a plan.
Do they need to
Do
make?
we need to vote on
Do they need
it?
a motion?
Yeah, make a motion for the
Wait a minute, are
applicant.
you gonna ask for public comment before, public comment on this?
True.
Well, I thought we would have public comment when it comes up to discuss it. It's up to Lindsay.
So you had public comment at the beginning. I see the discussion, but I guess they can take public comment on the revised amendment that you want to see.
But we don't know what that is until it gets here.
Right, I guess if you want to make a public comment on the draft that's in front of them that they're
Yeah, that's what I-
potentially not going to vote on, sure.
Okay.
Morning, Commissioners. Madam Chair, thanks for the opportunity. Jay Falstad, Queen Anne's Conservation Association. I have to say, I think in an attempt to accommodate Mr. Thompson, you're creating an even bigger problem for yourselves. And the reason I say that is because Mr. Thompson has submitted a text amendment in February. It's now been introduced. Are we now going to allow every single applicant that submits a text amendment to come in and have another bite at the apple? Because, as you know, you've had text amendments that have already come in. What about those people that had a deficient text amendment at the very beginning? Are you going to now go back and allow them to make adjustments to their text amendments in the same way that you're doing with Mr. Thompson? I think you're setting up an unfair system that accommodates him and leaves all of those other applicants sort of in the dark. Is that now going to be the policy of the Planning Commission, to allow text amendments, deficient text amendments, to be modified only to come back before you? I would just say that I think you are in a position where you have to either vote it up or down. In the 20 years that I've been coming to Planning Commission meetings, I don't think I've ever seen a circumstance where a text amendment was, where the applicant was given another bite at the apple to fix his deficient text amendment only to come back before you. So I would urge you to reject this outright as it stands today, notwithstanding the bad precedent that it could establish that Stephanie has already brought up. But I think just on procedural grounds, you're stepping into a bad spot here. So we'll see where it goes, but I would recommend that you vote this down as it is right now. And unfortunately for Mr. Thompson, he would have to come back next February with a new text amendment if he wants to modify it. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, you would have the ability to make a motion to amend the text amendment, or for the applicant to amend the text amendment consistent with your discussion for consideration. Of course, you can accept or reject as well. But it sounds like, based on your conversation, that you find that the text amendment is not deficient, but you wouldn't recommend it with the reconfiguration language. And so if you were inclined, you could make a motion to have the applicant revise the text amendment to reduce the scope of it and resubmit for a public hearing next month.
Okay, so I understand that, but at the same time, I don't want to set a precedent that we have the opportunity to give everybody to go back home and come back the following month. I understand that too.
Certainly, and I unfortunately am not as familiar with the history of text amendments and what has happened in the past.
This is the very first time, I've been on for 12 years now, this is the very first time I've seen a text amendment to where we did not have a clear recommendation from staff.
Has there ever been a text amendment where you have made a motion to recommend to the commissioners with revised language? Because that's really what you're doing. You just want to see the text of the revised language before sending it.
Right. I don't
Yes,
recall.
yes, you've done that in the past.
Okay.
Yep, for the solar one a few years ago and the Jamal's text amendments that have come through. You've also done that.
You are taking language that is being proposed as part of the citizen-sponsored text amendment. You're just cutting a majority of it as part of your recommendation.
Right.
And I think you're not redrafting it for them. You're not crafting it for them. You are simply modifying what's been in front of you if you're going to recommend that it's by administrative subdivision only and not reconfiguration. So you are reducing the scope of what's being proposed in front of you. And you could, today, if you were comfortable with it, make a motion to make a recommendation to the commissioners on the text amendment as revised, but it sounds like in doing your due diligence, you would rather see what the revised is prior to
Exactly,
the final vote.
exactly. Because we did not receive something from staff with the recommendation. And we want to be clear if we're going to vote on it.
Yeah, so you, in looking at the staff report and taking staff's recommendations, that you would consider a revised text amendment that reduces the scope of the effect of a transfer of development rights to only permit it if it's the administrative subdivision and not reconfiguration.
Right. Can I get that recommendation from one of the,
Can I ask a question of staff before we go further? Remind me again, please, why this wasn't rolled in with the other, why are we hearing it this month versus last with the other text amendment that came in timely?
It was just simply because the applicant requested it to be on the next month, wasn't able to make the meeting last month.
Okay.
It wasn't really.
It had been submitted properly.
Yeah, it was submitted at the same, with the time that was required to be submitted. It was just delayed a month for the applicant.
Got it.
Okay, Madam Chair, I'm going to take a stab at this motion. Madam Chair, I make a motion that with regard to the citizen-sponsored text amendment, County Ordinance Number 25-07, that the applicant revise the text amendment to reduce the scope of the effect of the transfer of development rights.
That's right, to permit an administrative subdivision only, but not reconfiguration.
I would like to incorporate the language that council just added to my motion.
And just to make clear that the motion to revise would be for reconsideration. And so you're not voting on approving the revised language, you're making a motion that the applicant revise the language consistent with your discussion for reconsideration.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could I ask council one quick thing?
sure?
Is it useful at this point to put in language like the planning commission hereby approves and then however, or hereby disapproves, and then however, making plain that we're approving or disapproving the request for the text amendment, but we want editorial changes?
So if you're going to approve or deny, then the amendment in front of you would die. It would either go forward to the commissioners or it would
Stop
die.
altogether.
Yes.
Okay.
So what you are doing is you are making a motion to have the applicant revise the text amendment to reduce the scope for reconsideration.
I have a question about your
Same.
question. So, at this point in the process, and just correct me if I'm wrong, this is a recommendation and not an approval and a denial. So you could recommend favorably with amendments or unfavorably with amendments, and it would still go to the county commissioners who may or may not support your recommendation. They'll have a public hearing and then they would vote. It wouldn't stop this amendment from moving forward.
So I think that's a consideration. That is the typical process. The typical process would be that you would make a favorable recommendation with the amendments that we have discussed, or an unfavorable as drafted. But I think their concern was that they wanted to see the actual language before making that favorable or unfavorable, which is not typical. And I don't know if there's something we could do now so that you're comfortable in making that motion to avoid another step.
Just, this, years ago, this wasn't, an entirely uncommon circumstance. In the last several years, we've really tried to keep these amendments on track. And this was a part of the reason that a year or so ago, staff came forward with a request to assign an application fee to this process. Not in this case, but in some cases, we've just received text amendments that maybe hadn't been as well thought out and presented as they might have been, because with a no-charge application, there's really no risk in just throwing an idea out there. And in those cases, the lack of clarity would often create a lot of questions. And I can remember some occasions when the text amendments the pause button was hit, and then staff was asked to assist to bring something back that seemed more feasible. And we've really moved away from that, because that isn't the intention of submitting a text amendment. If staff had supported a text amendment, or the Planning Commission or the commissioners supported a text amendment, we would have brought it forward. The citizen-sponsored text amendments are just that. And sometimes they're supported by staff, and sometimes there are a lot of questions. This is one of those cases where I think that there's a general understanding, but obviously the conversation has been, and leading up to this, has been, well, there are some unintended consequences that really should be addressed. So we have in the past re-reviewed applications, but really the policy in recent years has been not to do so, and it has made this process more smooth. This case reminds me a bit of some of the Jamal amendments, where the commission wanted to see additional language, but wanted to move the amendment along for county commissioner review. I think this is parallel to that situation, where if you wanted to send, your recommendation is favorable contingent upon these amendments being presented. If the amendments don't move forward, then your recommendation would be de facto unfavorable. If that helps to clarify.
Okay, Kath?
And so understanding the history, I think moving forward so that you're not changing the process, you are either going to vote to find the text amendment as drafted unfavorable, or you could find it favorable with the amendments to only permit an administrative subdivision, but not reconfiguration and not creating an additional lot.
Right.
And then going forward with the additional language that needs to be fixed, it would have to be done at a separate time because it's not part of this text amendment.
You want to withdraw your
Yes,
recommendation?
I'd like to withdraw my previous motion, Madam Chair. I'm sort of at a loss here.
I'll accept the motion that we disapprove.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we send an unfavorable recommendation to the county commissioners for County Ordinance 2507 as drafted.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Teddy? And Tom?
I raised my hand, I'm against.
Okay.
I made the motion, I'm in favor.
Okay. All right, so moved.
He
Oh,
seconded.
he's,
Yeah.
yep. Okay,
So the vote is unfavorable, you're not making any
Unfavorable,
recommendation
right.
on the language, okay.
yep. All right, next, discussion of text amendment 18-1-218, cluster buffer. Hold on one second.
All right, so this is really to continue the discussion we had at the end of the meeting last month, really to discuss that cluster subdivision buffer yard. As you have been receiving those requests before you, it does allow the planning commission or an applicant to submit a modification to those cluster buffer yards. You've received those requests. I have outlined in the memo basically addressing what decisions have been made and the applications that have been put forward. Basically, it's to look at that 30-foot wide vegetative buffer that goes around the cluster subdivisions in order to protect the ag uses and the property owners. We did draft some language, and that's on page 2. Really, it's just to remove the existing language and to reword some new language there. Basically, we used a bulleted list as opposed to a paragraph to really help with just clarity in the code. So it's a lot of the same wording, just kind of moved around in a bulleted form. You did request at the meeting last month that a time threshold be put on in the language, basically as to when the buffer yard had to be planted. Currently, it's happening now at the end at build out. And then also you requested that the portion where a applicant can modify their subdivision in order to remove that, you have requested that to be removed from the language itself. So the language is crafted. What we did, we were requiring that the property owner would have to implement the buffer yard prior to the issuance of a first permit. With these cluster subdivisions, the major cluster subdivisions, your first permit is generally going to be a grading permit. So it's not going to be put on the property owner itself that's building the house necessarily. It's going to be put on the developer when they go to put the roads in with the grading permit and infrastructure. So that's kind of where we've indicated it would be the best spot to require that buffer yard to be established. Also, we did remove the section that you had requested. Also, you didn't request this in the meeting last month, but looking at the language, the existing language that kind of gives staff and applicants basically a little bit of wiggle room as to what they're required to plant in that area. There's not a specific, you have to have this many of number. It just has to be that it meets.
But doesn't that depend on the size of the property and where it is?
Right, and the language says now, give me 1 second here. Basically, it says that it has to be mature plant material of a significant density. So that's, that can be looked at very differently, between staff, between property owners that are submitting it. So it's not something that's very black and white and easy to say, here, property owner, this is what you have to do. So we did give some suggestions as to how to change that, make it a little more clear if you're interested in doing so. Right now in the drafted language on page 2, it includes the vegetation requirements that are included in our utility scale solar regulations, but there are also some other options. You could leave it as is, just leave it like I just described, or you could change it to back what it was previously. There was, if you're looking on the bottom, on page 3, that language there, it's what previously with the 50-foot buffer requirement, now it's 30 feet. It required that for every 100 linear feet of buffer, the developer shall plant 7 canopy trees, 15 understory trees or large shrubs, and 13 small shrubs. So there are some options that you could consider if you're looking to change what those landscaping requirements are. Like I said, we could keep it the same if you're only interested in looking at the two items that we discussed last month.
And that was 30, not 13 shrubs.
Oh, yes. And I did create this slide. It shows all of those landscaping standards that I just mentioned. But if you want to talk about, I know it's a lot on one screen, but I wanted you to be able to see all of the versions in one place. So the one on the left is what's existing now. Basically, it says consists of a mixture of canopy trees, canopy whips, and mature plant material of significant density to provide immediate buffering capacity in the vicinity of the proposed development. So that's basically the landscaping requirement. In the middle, that was the language that was repealed in 2012 when it changed from 50 feet to 30 feet. And then on the right, that's proposed as it is in our utility scale solar requirements. So if you want to talk about certain parts, walk through the amendment, we can do so.
Stephanie, I have a question about C1, right? We're trying to tighten up language. And it says,
You're talking about the as is in the
as
existing-
proposed in the
okay.
memo, C1, shall be at least 6 feet in height, planted on centers of 6 to 12 feet, depending on plant type. Like, that seems a little slightly ambiguous as well. What, is there,
And well, basically we wanted to use something that was already existing in the code, and this is what is in the solar regs, so it's just a copy and paste of what's in the solar
Right.
regs.
so what determines the plant type and the distance on center, is my point.
Oh, between the 6 and 12 feet?
Yes. Is one an evergreen, is one, or is it a type of evergreen?
I think it's what the applicant submits generally. It has to meet the plant standards from AS.
Rob Gunter, Principal Planner. Yeah, so plant species have spacing requirements, so dependent on white pine or cedar or black pine, whatever they want to plant, there are spacing requirements. So Mike Wisnowski, former director, was a landscape architect, and he crafted the utility scale solar landscape regulations. So that's where that came from. There's a section in that landscape section that has to be meet
AS.
ANSI or
That's
ANSI
it.
or whatever plant standards there are. It may be in there, I'm not sure. But they typically propose it. Usually we're seeing 8 to 10 feet on center.
It reads oddly.
And we put some, Stephanie and I have worked together. She came to me and I was like, this is what we have. Let's put something on a piece of paper so the board can react. If you want it at 8 feet, that's by all means. It's
No,
just-
it depends on what kind of tree.
Right. It just seems we're leaving
It's
it up to the
far
applicant.
easier as somebody who looks at the plans and reviews the plans to do either the middle or the right
Let
column.
me just add the terminology, per species.
Or we could just say that it has to meet those AMSI plant standards.
Yeah, I think it's
That sounds
ANSI
good.
300A or something.
Yeah,
You could add
the
that
reference,
as-
it's in the
Yeah.
solar, I can pull it right
At the bottom.
directly from that.
Because otherwise, guess what? I'm planning
12,
12 feet.
absolutely.
Because that's
every
what I'd read of depending on plant type.
It's far easier for me to say, okay, well, at least they met the 12 than to meet the existing.
Agreed. But while we're tightening up language, let's tighten it
Well,
up.
I don't disagree at
Okay.
all.
That was a good pick.
I try. I have my moments.
While we're at it, if you look at number 4, shrubs, intermediate or tall, with a minimum size at installation of 24 inches in height or 30 inches in spread. How many? The solar code doesn't dictate that,
As far as density, you mean?
yes.
Right.
And we get some, like bluegrass, that are
Well, the
planted
existing
extremely
now
well.
is 30.
Yeah, so how many numbers of shrubs per 100 feet
Right.
are they supposed to plant? It's not dictated to them.
Right. It just says shrubs.
Can we
think
add
they
that
just-
in?
Could be two.
Because it's got 30 down
One
here.
more.
Yeah.
So the middle one says 30, you could add 30, you could say, well, that's way too many, 15. Any number on my end would be appreciative, because again, I'm the one making
Gives
sure
you
they're in
something to hold them
compliance.
to, right?
And Rob, they just use the shrubs to fill in all the gaps in the end, right? That's what they're
Nancy,
doing.
Nancy doesn't tell you that?
So if you look at it, and let's just say you have a staggered row of evergreens every 10 feet, you have a deciduous tree, 1 per 100 feet, and an understory tree, 1 per 100 feet. So the shrubs are meant to fill in the gaps. So I don't know if that helps you get to a number. If you think 30 small shrubs is fine, but
Yeah, that was
Sounds like a lot.
that was for a 50-foot width.
yes.
Previously, the clusters, it's required a 50-foot width, now it's a 30-foot, so, the 30 small shrubs, may.
But then you turn around, it's for a 50-foot buffer, but you turn around and put 100 linear feet
It's
above,
a linear, right.
linear foot of
Yeah, so one's
buffer,
width
so
and-
why
so-
are you confusing? Why make
No,
it
it's-
15?
Two different measurements. So the buffer would be, currently it's 30 feet in width. So off the back of your property
And
line, it's
50
30
feet in
feet
depth.
deep. And then we provide a
Okay.
cross-section. So for every 100 or 150 feet, you need evergreens planted 10 feet on center. So if you're doing 10 feet on center, it's 10. And then 1 deciduous, 1 understory, and however many shrubs per every 100 feet. And what they do is they create the cross-section, and then they just copy and paste it for
Replicated.
the entire linear feet of the buffer. It makes it easier on them.
And you?
Sometimes I feel like a kindergartner when I count plants, because I use colors and crayons and markers.
I would think we should be able to marry the two, meaning the bracketed numbers in C, 1 through 4, and the bullets on the 100 linear feet, right? 7 canopy trees, then with the size variations and the densities included, would be the ultimate, right?
So I think
30 small shrubs, intermediate or tall, with a minimum size of the installation 26 inches, 30 inches on spread.
the difference between the two is the middle one does not account for any evergreens,
15 understory?
which is why I think the deciduous and the understory tree are such smaller numbers than 7 and 15, because the evergreens are the larger number in that one. So whichever way you guys would prefer, we're fine, as long as there's a number we can count.
Number's easier.
I like the third one and just clean it up. What do you guys say?
Yeah, give them a number.
Mr. Baker?
Just needs a number of shrubs, right?
Is there something you're thinking that would be appropriate? Obviously, the 30 shrubs, that was for the 50-foot in width. Would you want it to be something reduced, obviously, since that was for 50 feet, or would you want to keep it at 30? I mean, we could reduce it by the percent. Obviously, between your 50-foot width to your 30-foot width, we could reduce it by the
Whatever
percentage
percentage that would
That
be.
makes
of that
sense.
was.
Yeah,
So the density essentially stays the same. Yeah.
Probably gonna be in the 18 to 22.
Yeah, I think it was,
somewhere
I did
around
the
there.
math.
Yeah, wait, better quick.
Have any suggestions, Mr. Reese? Are you on mute?
Yes, I am. No suggestions, Madam Chair.
What about Mr. Tillman?
No, I like the idea of the percentage, keep the density the same.
Okay.
agreed.
So you're good then with it being prior to the issuance of any permit? That's appropriate, okay. One thing we did do, so now this is applicable to all cluster subdivisions. We looked at really the applicability of the number of lots that you're putting this around. So we do have cluster subdivisions where I think it's 5 or fewer lots. They're allowed to be the lots are allowed to be up against the road, and you don't have to have an internal access. And having that buffer yard around those lots that are up against the road and they might be kind of scattered, it's really not serving the same purpose necessarily as if it's a major cluster subdivision where they have an internal access and they're entirely surrounded by an agricultural use. So it's more of a holistic buffer I think, at that point, as opposed to if it would just be, not the major cluster subdivisions. So that's one change that was made, but I think for applicability purposes, it makes sense for the buffer for the major cluster subdivisions as opposed to might be, 4 or 5 lots up against road frontage.
Or just one lot. We tend to get
Yeah.
a lot of cluster subdivisions. You'll have a lot develop here, and as it currently exists, if we applied the standard, they'd have to plant a buffer completely around their parcel. 12 years goes by, and my next kid's going to college, and I create a lot over here, now you have another buffer. And now I want a new combine, and now I have a lot here, and now you have another, so now we're fragmenting the farm, and we're doing fragmented buffers, which we've decided doesn't really necessarily work. So that's why we are gonna take that away and just apply it to the major cluster subdivisions where we can get a holistic buffer that does protect the farmer from the development. That was the thought process anyway.
But otherwise, the language is pretty same, just moved around in bullet format as opposed to paragraph for ease. So then,
Okay.
moving forward, if you are comfortable with what we've discussed, you can, basically through resolution, you have to make, basically tell staff to create the ordinance itself, and then that ordinance would be placed on another agenda, and at that point, you would hold a public hearing, and then you would be able to convey it to the to the county commissioners with a recommendation.
Okay,
I know usually we don't see this process very often, so I wanted to be sure that you understood.
can I get a recommendation from one of the commissioners?
Madam Chair,
There's one on page 4 if you're looking for one. Sorry, it went over to the
oh, here we
next
go.
page.
That's okay. Madam Chair, be it resolved that according to paragraph 18(1)(218.a), B, and their authority to initiate a text amendment, the Planning Commission has discussed the importance and the intent of the cluster buffer yard and directs staff to have an ordinance created as drafted above that include any edits and changes that come up from conversation deemed appropriate.
Can I get a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And now we are coming to the end. Any public comments? Oh,
I promise not to belabor the point, but first, I did want to thank you for voting down the text amendment earlier. I just wanted to make one clarification that Director Mordock brought up, and that I mentioned in my comment. There have been other circumstances where text amendments were sent back, but that was for staff clarification. The distinction between those circumstances and the one that happened today is that you were going to be giving the applicant an opportunity to take it back home. And so I just wanted to make clear that I did not mean to mislead in saying in my 20 years I've never seen that happen. In 20 years, I've never seen an applicant be allowed to take his homework back to correct what the
but it
teacher
was
said
really
was
going
wrong.
back to Stephanie.
I'm sorry?
It was really going back to Stephanie.
Well, yes, but you were giving him, or at least what he was asking for was a second bite of the apple. And that's where I haven't seen historically where staff maybe said, we do acknowledge that there's some language here that's maybe unclear. In this case, he was acknowledging that it was unclear and he wanted the opportunity to correct it. And that's the distinction. So anyway, I didn't want you to
Okay.
think that I was misleading the commission when I made my
No,
comment
that's
earlier.
okay. We understand.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Mr. Reese?
Madam Chair, if I may have the floor, please.
Sure.
For an announcement. Looks like I froze.
No, you're there. We hear you.
Okay.
We see you.
I'm frozen on the screen. After 30 fulfilling years of volunteer service, I write this letter today with a full heart to formally announce my retirement from the Planning Commission and volunteering within the county. Serving this community alongside you has been one of my greatest honors of my life. From the early days of becoming a firefighter, to becoming a life member, to teaching catechism and Bible study to our youth, coaching soccer, softball, basketball, and football, and participating in a wide range of community activities, from teas for the art councils to picking up trash at Terrapin Park. Every moment has deepened my appreciation for the spirit and service and the power of our community. These years have not only shaped who I am, but have also allowed me to witness the resilience of the people we serve and those I have served with. The firehouse has always felt like a second home, and I will forever cherish those bonds formed. And I'm so grateful to have played a small part in making a positive difference in the lives of so many. As I step away from my second job as a professional volunteer, please know that my commitment to this community remains unwavering. Though I'm retiring from my official capacities, my heart is and always will be with this county and the people it serves. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to serve. I look forward to supporting you all in new ways and continuing the vital work that we've built together. It is with deepest gratitude and respect that this resignation will take effect July 1st. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Any questions for him?
Thank you for your service and your volunteerism in the community. It's so important.
I knew that was a difficult speech to give, and we thank you.
Yes, and I will see you all in person next month.
Okay.
I just want to also add my thanks and appreciation for all of the support that you've given to the county, given to the Planning Commission, and also given to staff. You've been a wonderful colleague and a great mentor, and I appreciate that very much, and I know we all do. Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Okay, any other additional comments? All right, then I can accept my next motion.
Madam Chair, I move for adjournment.
Like, second?